Daipachi Ego, a character in Blue Lock who, for plot reasons only, exists to create the best soccer player in the world. He's basically doing this by putting a group of high schoolers in a military camp, but only for soccer, but for character reasons is enabling their ego slash motivations to become the best soccer players they can possibly be, to perform better in the field, and to still be hungry while playing other matches out there. His goal is as clear as it comes. He wants to make the greatest soccer player in Japan for the world. He currently hates the third rated Japanese soccer team, specifically because they haven't won a single soccer World Cup yet. But he praises all the other champions like Noel Noah or Ronaldo or like Messi, and he's using them as examples to prove everybody else wrong. He wants to enable the characters of Blue Lock, other characters of Blue Lock, to become egotistical maniacs so that they are selfish, driven, but yet they score goals without hesitation. This is who he looks up to, and this is the motivation he wants to drive into these characters. Basically a blank slate. What I find interesting about this character is that there isn't another character like this out there, and I want to talk about why he specifically works and why him being unique, different, and interesting, despite being portrayed in a negatively connotative light most of the time, is someone that in the manga and anime genre is so new and refreshing to look upon. I'll only be talking about anime. I want to talk about a new perspective about ego and what it takes to become number one, okay? But first, let's address this. This is the equivalent. Ego is basically the equivalent of giving a sociopath a bunch of money to fulfill his crazy fantasy and run a crazy batshit psychological experiment just to see how kids would turn out. This, of course, unlike Lord of the Flies, there is a clear goal for these kids. I mean, he is promising one of these kids by the end of the Blue Lock journey, they will have become a solitary hero that has become the best player in the world. But unlike most people selling a grift or a dream, he's willing to back up his talk. He's willing to do the dirty talk. He portrays reality and soccer for what it really is and why people truly pursue it, to score goals and to become the best they can be. So that's why he doesn't sugarcoat any of these like truths or anything like that. He doesn't appease anyone's emotion, nor does he sugarcoat the truth. He speaks his mind, and it's always about soccer and how to do better. Some might call it crazy, while the rest of us call him a batshit crazy man. But more on this point, he doesn't overstay his welcome. In fact, when you compare his screen time compared to a lot of the other characters, it's very low. But whenever he does show up, he often acts as like this sort of narrator or this guide, sort of like teacher, where he gives them these lessons or clues, or corrects their train of thought when they're struggling with a challenge or figuring something out. He doesn't just hand them the keys or solution to the problems, but he tells them what they need to be focusing on, turning zeros into ones, or turning ones into 100s, or what the goal is for the next round in order to proceed. But coming back to this more crazy batshit psychological experiment, the whole purpose of this, I argue, is that ego is driving his idea of an ego as motivation for these players to do better and to be more selfish and an egomaniac when it comes to grabbing your dreams and hopes and all that other stuff. He's made it very clear that you can lose your dream of becoming a soccer player with the elimination of players during each round and tests and roulettes. To talk about ego is to talk about the main theme of Blue Lock, which is to do better and to fight your problems head on. And this idea of loss is very much a real threat. I mean, he has most of these players separated from like the real world or realities. Outside specifically, this almost sounds like a cult, and forces them into a do or die situation with their future careers of soccer on the line. During the round robin, Ego was giving specialized advice to each of the groups about how they should be taking their approach to soccer matches and the games. Of course, during the round robin, Ego set up the soccer matches and the system to reward the best soccer players, whoever scored the most goals, and who won the round robin in general. Of course, any losers get dropped. The point that Ego was trying to make here is that there are no take-backsies. You lose, you're out. By setting up the soccer system in this way, he doesn't warn the players about the impending doom or conflict that's about to come. I mean, he kind of does, but he more or less focuses on the solution that they need to figure out and provide. The players need to figure out and provide. Otherwise, they're not going to make it out of this alive. I mean, the whole point of the round robin was to make the players focus on turning their zeros into ones, figuring out how they score goals, what they needed to do in order to make those goals come alive, and to make sure that the players were legitimately fighting for their lives on the line. But more on his role, because once the round robin was over and they moved on to the second selection arc of the story, where basically all he does is provide the characters with nothing more than the instructions. Any other narration, he would do would be provided as an outside or like a third source. But he would be more or less talking to the assistant lady. I'm calling her assistant lady. Don't fight me, please. The assistant lady will comment on something interesting that happens in the soccer scene, and of course, Eagle will respond in kind with his opinion, sort of solidifying what they're going through and what needed to happen in order for these players to reach the conclusion they did. And he, of course, expresses his own bias and thoughts, but in a way, it's sort of correct. He basically does answer her questions whenever something interesting happens, but when it's not supposed to be Isagi who understands or narrates the play, he basically acts as sort of like the third character to cut out to basically give a plot synopsis of what the character should be experiencing or going through. I would love to talk about the fact that he shows no favorites, but often talks about important concepts such as talent and luck. You should look up those two individual videos, but I'll have them play side by side. But the main reason for making this video, and I briefly touched upon this before, is that this man gives life lessons all the time, and it's surprisingly super relevant to both the characters, strikers in Blue Lock, and to us, the audience at home. When we were given first impressions about this character, he came off as awfully confident, mean, condescending, and downright narcissistic. This was the author's intention, by the way, to present him in this negative light. But as we go on later in the series, when he talks during the show, it's always to provide insight and to guide the players into becoming better than others. He's basically sort of say this is the problem that I've created, this is the solution you have to come up with. The round robin was intentionally set up to destroy any preconceived notions, especially the first match they had about soccer, and to get all the strikers of the game to score goals. He was basically telling them that this is what they needed to do next, as in the first round, they needed some heroes to stand out from the crowd in order to score goals, as the heroes sort of act as leaders, and they eventually form the team around them. Baro served as a perfect example to this, and Barichia and Isagi served as the perfect example to this, even in this first match. This is how you unify a team of strangers. And I never thought about it that way, but that is basically what ended up happening. They eventually grew close, but for a first match, things were bound to be rough. But as the rounds go on in the round robin, he eventually starts talking to these players in the locker rooms to give them appropriate advice about turning their zeros into ones, being able to figure out how to score goals. His advice more or less goes along the lines of, remember your last goal you scored. What was your setup? What was your mindset? What were the conditions needed to get there? How many defenders were on the field? Where was the goalie positioned? Where were you positioned? Are there any other relevant factors that you needed to be in place in order to help you score a goal? He was basically enabling and telling every other character what they needed to learn, grow, do, and improve. Basically to enforce this idea of replicability.
Replicability.
The ability to replicate shots and goals over and over again, to basically improve the probability of scoring goals. This was seen in both Baro, Nagi, and Isagi during the second selection round. More specifically Isagi, as he was constantly improving and showing his strategy and playing making skills. Baro already had this figured out, so he basically dominated the field. And so did Kunigami. But once the round robin was over, Ego basically invests the whole budget of the soccer camp into making sure that the players were capable of scoring goals independently, and they weren't dependent on others to do better. He basically forced the teams before from separating from each other and to individually perform in order to score 100 goals in a very different situation and environments. Of course, the second selection that follows this training camp reinforces this idea of being independent and then being able to link up with others to create chain reactions that make goals against other players. Everything this man does is to make these people better. But surprisingly, the advice he gives is for us to do better, for us to be able to do better. And it's almost like he's speaking to us directly. Because everything this man does for the kids are meant to help them score and grow as strikers, while enabling their egos to perform, to be selfish, and to pursue the growth without the need of others. He is motivating them to do better. It is simply to be the best. Everyone there has that same emotion, and when everyone is on that same page, irregardless of personality, everyone will try and cooperate with each other to win, score, and be the best on the field. Now, another thing that I like, and which I was genuinely surprised about, but the way he went about it and often gave like a life lesson with this, it was that he would often talk down or fight against this rich people in soccer who often gatekeep the business and make it business-like, taking any fun out of soccer. I mean, we've all had that talk about dressing down and like doing good just to please the rich guy or to be that yes man. But basically, ego basically talks down to this rich people for getting out of hand. I mean, he just flat out says he hates these people for killing off any talented players, for their selfish greed, and for them making a quick buck without supporting or appreciating the sport as a whole. He's basically screwed over these celebrities or these strikers to perform the best in the world. He is constantly fighting back against these people for their biased way of looking at things, especially soccer, while being invested in their bottom line, especially the president of the soccer club. There's one character that has been foreshadowed that this may have affected on, but no spoilers. I swear, the only reason this is enabled in the first place was because of the idea proposed to make lots of money from Blue Lock, despite investing a whole lot into it. There is no reason why Blue Lock should exist ethically. I don't know why, but I can only imagine it was for monetary reasons. And I'm glad Ego hijacked it and made sure that the growth of the players was more important than anything else. And there's just more to this than a few other points that happen in the manga, but we'll just wait for the anime to drop out before I talk about them further on. But I do want to say there is a refreshing take on the competitive scene. It is a competitive field out there, and it's a sad moment when a coach doesn't pick you for a team or you don't get selected for playing. Most people do end up getting rejected, but some of the coaches end up hiding behind a piece of paper for their rejection or leave a notice with a time frame to leave, and that's just pathetic. I mean, Ego, in a way, can be seen as a brutal antagonist for a lot of these kids, and there's no other way around it. And in a sort of way, you can appreciate him for being brutally honest and hyper-focused about how soccer should be, with his lesson plans, rejection plans, and all that. Unfortunately, not everyone gets to become a soccer player, and that's a sad reality for many. Especially for those that have it as their passion, it's a hard thing to accept or swallow that you can't become a soccer player. However, some coaches, unlike Ego, would avoid addressing it entirely, but still try to fire you somehow, or dress it up as much as they can so they don't make you feel bad. But I say this hurts the kid more than it does anything else. I will say it is nice to see someone who creates that pressure and fear of losing and makes it so utterly terrifying that everyone is fully aware of the consequences and are greatly motivated not to lose. And there are no surprises, there are no backends, there's nothing like that. Everything is laid out bare for either you to make it or not. I can't honestly think of another example of Ego being like this phenomenal character. He has demonstrated what makes him so great. Brutally honest, but still wants to make the best soccer player in the world, and is constantly giving advice for kids to do better. I mean, he creates this crazy social experiments, but we see the results of these kids performing better and improving over time. I appreciate the fact that he respects the skills and determination of the other players and is often fighting for their future by resisting the changes from the businessmen and the media and all that stuff, basically not being swayed in any of this. This is almost utterly terrifying, but the fact is we're seeing these characters grow and improve and become like promising soccer players. And he's very harsh about this. He's making people better by encouraging them to develop their own appropriate correct skills for their situation.